So we're making pretty good progress here. We're pretty organized. We have our layer groups containing the content for the header and main sections. If we return back to the sketch document, you can see that we have this About section. And the About section is nothing more than a heading and some text. So the easiest and quickest way to wireframe this section is to come over to wireframe.psd, expand the main layer group, and just highlight the Our Mission layer, hold down the Shift key, and select the Lorem Ipsum layer. And we just want to duplicate these layers. Of course, there's a couple different ways that you can do this. We're just going to click and drag these layers down here to the New Layer button. It creates two new layers. Of course, these layers are inside the main layer group, which we don't want them in there. So we're going to click and drag them out of it by letting go of the layers as we see this highlight just above that layer group. We can go ahead and collapse the main layer group. With the Move tool selected, V is the keyboard shortcut, by the way, hold down the Shift key and the down arrow to nudge these elements down into the About section. Then you can come over and choose the Type tool. I'm going to change the text Our Mission to About Us. That will require probably a little bit of nudging in terms of making sure that it appears in the center of the layout. Come over and choose the Move tool and use the right arrow key on your keyboard to accomplish that. I think that looks pretty good. And I don't want quite as much text visible here. So again, I'm going to choose the Type tool. T is the keyboard shortcut. I'm just going to click and drag this box up a little bit so we just see 2 lines of type. That looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and create another layer group, and we'll call this About. And then, of course, what we want to do is drag these 2 layers into the About layer group so we can keep this Layers panel nice and tidy. Let's come back to the Sketch document. Inside the Sketch document, the next section is this Team section. We'll go ahead and wireframe this out. We have a heading, a couple circles that are going to contain images of team members, and then a button down here towards the bottom. So returning back to this wireframe document, we do need this heading, so we can duplicate it. Again, we can expand the About layer group, just drag this About Us layer to the New Layer button. It creates a copy, drag it out of the About layer group. And we're going to go ahead and select the Type tool and update this text. Of course, we may want to move it first, but it's not necessary. We can go ahead and update this to Team. Once you do that, you can highlight the Move tool. You can use the right arrow key to kind of nudge it in the center, and then the down arrow key clearly to get it in this Team section. So I think we're going to put this heading right about here. We may need to move it. Then we want 3 circles. So we can come over here to the Tools panel and choose the Ellipse tool. And with the Ellipse tool, we're going to go ahead and click once. And we want to create an ellipse that's 150 pixels wide and 150 pixels tall. Go ahead and click OK. It creates that for you. That's perfect. We need 3 of these. So I'm just going to go ahead and nudge this over to the left so it falls nicely within our columns. We may need to reposition it in a moment, but for right now, let's just get 3 of these guys. So with this selected, hold down the Alt key on Windows, Option on the Mac, click and drag to the right to place this one in the center. Again, I'll go ahead and nudge this around with the arrow keys on my keyboard. Then I'll click and drag this over to the right, leaving 1 column of space between them. And I can just nudge this around until I'm happy with the location of it. And I think that looks pretty good. Now, if we take a look at the sketch, we also have a line under here which would represent some copy. I don't know if we need to add that within the wireframe, but we certainly want to add that button. So I'm going to come over and choose the Rectangle tool. And with the Rectangle tool, I'm just going to click and drag out a rectangle that occupies 2 column widths. So I think that looks good. We have that section complete. If we come back to the Sketch document, the next section is the map. Now this is pretty easy because there's really nothing to wireframe. The map will be nothing more than an image. So we can come over to the wireframe document, and inside the wireframe document, if you still have the Rectangle tool selected, great. If not, you can come over and select it. U is the keyboard shortcut. And I'm going to come over here and I'm going to click and drag out a rectangle that occupies the entire width of the grid system guides that we have set up. And then I'm going to come over and choose the type tool. And with the type tool over here to the right, I'm just going to type the text map. Now you may want to make this larger. You may want to adjust the tracking to space it out a little bit. It's really up to you. I'm going to go ahead and make it a little bit larger. I don't want quite as dark, so I'm going to go ahead and choose a darker gray color. And if you do open up the character panel under the window menu, you can choose character. I'm going to go ahead and adjust the tracking to space it out just a tad. And then I'm just going to click and drag this over here on the center. So when you look at this wireframe, you know that a map will be presented here. Finally, if we come back to the sketch, you can see we have a footer. I'm going to be honest with you, many times when I create wireframes, I don't bother adding content to the footer because footers contain such little information, there's really no reason to wireframe it out. Unless you have one of those newer, really tall footers that contain a lot of information, then maybe you want to wireframe it out, but for now, I'm not going to. The last thing that we need to do is clean up the layers panel, of course. So we have this About layer group. I'm going to come over here and create another layer group by clicking the Layer Group button. I'm going to go ahead and rename this Team, and we know that this text here, Team, needs to go into that layer group, but also these three ellipse layers and this rectangle layer. So I'm just holding down the Shift key as I click on them. Then we can click and drag these layers into that layer group and collapse it. Finally, we can create one more layer group. Go ahead and click that same New Layer Group button. And I'm going to go ahead and call this Map. And I'm going to place those other two layers within this Layer Group folder. So now both those elements are in there. Our Layers panel is nice and organized. And at this point, we have a pretty good wireframe, a good idea as to what this website may look like when we start adding real content.